As a general rule, I like to review game series chronologically, but if you search through my videos, you'll find no such review for the original Shenmue. I'll save you the effort. I have however played the original on Dreamcast, albeit years ago, but with the remasters out and Shenmue 3 on the way, I thought now would be a fitting time to finally play the sequel to the Dreamcast's greatest game. I figured I may as well review it while I'm at it, so here we are. Unfortunately, financial restrictions prevent me from playing the actual Dreamcast version of this sequel, which is a shame, but I do have the Xbox port since it fell very much within Retro Game On's production budget, that being $3. Always check independent thrift stores. This Xbox version came out late 2002 and early 2003 around the world, while the Dreamcast version was from late 2001. With the Dreamcast beyond freefall at the time, which was very sad, Microsoft snapped up exclusive console rights to the game, which is why you won't find it on systems such as the PS2 or the GameCube. While everyone else is pumped for the third release next August, let's instead now take a moment to check out Shenmue 2, where the series was left at a standstill all those years ago. If you're like me and haven't played the original in something like 7 years, you'll be glad to know that the Xbox version of Shenmue 2 comes with an entire separate DVD just to catch you up on the saga so far. Kind of like a Let's Play but from 2001 and available on VHS, this hour-and-a-half long video chronicles all the cutscenes of the original game as well as certain snippets of gameplay. I watched the whole thing for reviewing purposes and also for the sheer novelty of the thing, but if you don't feel like sitting through that, there's a much shorter recap on the actual game disc. So, since I haven't covered the first game in any detail on this channel, I better mention what Shenmue is all about. You take the role of one Ryo Hazuki, an everyday normal Japanese teenager in the 80s who also happens to be proficient in the martial arts and kicking butt. So, spoiler alerts ahead for the first game, it's necessary for me to cover this sequel. In the original Shenmue, Ryo witnesses his father being murdered in their family dojo by a Chinese gangster named Lan Di. This event seems to have been triggered by Lan Di retrieving a stone artifact called the Dragon Mirror, but also revenge since Ryo's dad allegedly murdered someone close to him. Skip through hours of gameplay around an open world 80s Japan, winning a massive battle against a local gang connected to Lan Di, and then finding another stone relic called the Phoenix Mirror in a hidden basement. The original Shenmue finished with young Ryo setting sail for Hong Kong so he can whack Lan Di and enact revenge of his own. I would love to cover the original in its own video sometime. The only thing stopping me is that I haven't set up my Dreamcast for VGA video yet, but the explanation I gave was simplistic at best. In the meantime, there are plenty of videos out there covering the original if you want to know more, but Shenmue 2 starts exactly where the original left off. Floating into Hong Kong, Ryo immediately immerses himself in the local gang scene as he searches for a fellow martial arts expert in hiding who sent a letter to his father warning of Lan Di's intentions. Unfortunately, the letter did not make it to Ryo's father in time, but as this is Ryo's only lead, he seeks him out. And well hidden he is. This chapter of the adventure will take Ryo through Hong Kong itself, a fictionalized version of Kowloon that's entirely based on the legendary Kowloon walled city, and then into the Chinese countryside. Shenmue could be classed as an adventure game, but it's an RPG at heart. There is a huge emphasis on exploration, and the environments are large enough to necessitate that. As you partake in missions, you'll be required to traverse around and, for the most part, converse with NPCs. In fact, a lot of the mission structure goes something like this. 1. You walk around. 2. Talk to random peeps on the street until you find one with the right information. 3. Go to the location of interest. And repeat. A few NPCs will even lead the way to a location, which is nice of them. Too bad they're so slow. Regardless, this whole process can be a bit grating at times, but it does open up the game to a few more gameplay quirks. The biggest of these is the fighting. Shenmue was originally going to be called Virtual Fighter RPG after all. The whole process of the series is based on classic Chinese and Japanese cinema, so there is lots and lots of fighting. The combat system in Shenmue is actually based on Virtua Fighter to a degree, and if you play the game genre regularly, I'm sure you'll feel right at home. I for one am not that sort of gamer, but even a boob like me may do. There are your standard kick and punch moves, but as the game goes on, you'll encounter masters of certain styles who'll teach you all sorts of tricks. These become invaluable as a lot of the time the fighting is not optional, and paired with well-timed dodges should get you through most situations unscathed. These combat sequences are about as limber as Rio gets though, as to control him around the greater Hong Kong is akin to a badly oiled tank. He's very determined to walk in one direction once he gets going, and any kind of turning at speed will incur trouble. If you're in a wide open street, it generally isn't a problem, but once you're navigating more cramped quarters, which is basically the inside of any building, you can get quite sloppy and robotic to control. There are also these investigation sections that switch you to the first person. Again, the control is clunky, it's probably even worse in the first person, but I like these segments. There is a decent amount of detail in some environments, and someone went to a lot of effort to design and create many different objects for the game world. So this is a great way to appreciate those. It was fun to explore and really made me pay attention to the surroundings. It reminded me a lot of investigation sequences in LA Noire, or even Detroit Become Human if we're thinking of something more modern. Otherwise, a number of Rio's moves and action sequences are determined by quick time events, i.e. QTEs. I really suck at QTEs and found them to be a source of major frustration while playing. However, while at first I considered the whole system to just be a buggy mess, later in the game I swapped controllers and found that the D-pad on the first controller was actually the problem causer. Even with a working controller, however, I still had issues. It's also a bit irritating to have the control of the game removed from you temporarily. Doing a massive finishing move in a fight or jumping off a ledge just doesn't feel the same if it's just achieved by pushing the B button at the correct time. It kinda sucks that they're so common now in modern games, but Shenmue really uses them to the extreme. There are a few other lulls in gameplay too, some monotonous, others boring. At one point in the game, for instance, you spend 5 minutes collecting firewood in a cave. It's as exhilarating as it sounds. But, complaints aside, everything is conveyed in the way it is for the sake of storytelling. In a way, Yu Suzuki has crafted this story, presented it in a way much like how you would experience it in the real world. Sure, you can go and do this awesome and cinematic event, but you'll have to walk there in real time first, and if it's too late, you'll have to call it in for that day because you need to sleep. You're just a simple meat sack after all. Maybe it's not the best way a game should be played, but it's different. I'll give it that. One factor that is rooted in reality is money. Money is, of course, important in an adventure that takes place in a foreign country, and you'll need it as the game progresses. The game is a bit more lenient with this luckily. It's not like you'll die if you don't purchase any food, but it's expected you'll have it on hand at certain points in the game. For one, you stay in a hotel when you first get to Hong Kong, which of course isn't free, but pro tip, if you just keep continually promising the guy at the desk you'll pay the next day and eventually not come back at all, you'll never have to pay. Sorry dude, revenge turns some into monsters. Not sure if that would actually work in real life, but some other parts of the game do force you to come up with some dosh if you are to progress. Money can be made by gambling, working menial jobs, and selling stuff in pawn stores. There's even a dedicated conversation menu about asking people how to make a few dollars, but I'll save you the effort. Gamble. Gamble like the fiend you are. Gamble as much as you possibly can, and if you lose, simply restart the Xbox like the sore loser you are. It's best to play Shenmue without any conscience whatsoever. It is a tale of revenge after all. So, what of these mini-games and collectibles? The game world is brimming with them, and they can be found at basically any corner. The mini-games are great, and it's obvious a lot of attention has been given to them. Highlights include the arcade machines, of which all are original Yu Suzuki titles. Some examples include Outrun and Afterburner, and if they're all a bit too much, you can simply play something like darts. They are trying to base this off the real world. After all, even a Japanese martial artist whose only intent to kill needs some downtime too. If you would like to play these on a whim, they can be accessed by the main menu once they're unlocked. All of this might seem overwhelming, there's a lot of control schemes to memorize after all, but luckily Shenmue 2 has a great help system. Whenever you're partaking in a task, be that playing Space Harrier or trying to figure out just how that first person investigation mode works, there will always be a help menu. This is a simple thing for sure, but it was nice to know you could always fall back on that if you got stuck. I'm sure it saved plenty of frustration, because who reads the manual anyway? Being that Shenmue 2 is an open world RPG, there is obviously a huge emphasis on world building. This is a world brimming with movement, full of people going about their days, all of whom you can be bothered to ask menial questions. There are plenty of buildings you can go into. You could easily play through the entire game and not go into many of them, but I found that even going into random ones, there was at the very least a conversation with someone to be had that wasn't available anywhere else. If you're a fan of game worlds, you could do a lot worse than to explore and immerse yourself in this one. The areas can be quite large though, but if you're prone to getting lost, maps for $10 a pop can be bought for each area. I found that in most areas I could do without. The locations varied enough that traveling wasn't confusing, but I guess it's nice to have the option there if you need it. There's also a day-night cycle, which was a fairly new thing in open world 3D games at the time, but annoyingly, Rio does have a bedtime. At a certain time at night, the game will kick you out of whatever you happen to be doing, so Rio can have his sleepy time with his shoes on. But then when he wakes up, the game gives you the option to quick travel back to wherever you were anyway, making the whole process somewhat pointless. It just interrupts the gameplay for no good reason. Sure, it does give you the option to save when he wakes up, but then again, you can save whenever you want anyway. And that's definitely a plus in the game's favour. At any time, you can simply bring up a menu and save no matter where you are or what you're doing. Be warned that the saving system is not automatic, however. There are no protections in place for idiots like myself. At one point I had to redo about an hour's worth of gameplay because I forgot to save. It was a decently difficult part too, annoyingly. The sinking feeling in my stomach after the realization I didn't save 1 second after hitting the Xbox's power button was not very pleasant. Otherwise, there are plenty of checkpoints given throughout the missions if you die or fail in some way, so there's no need to continuously keep saving when you are mid-mission. I won't spoil the ending here, but I did find it quite slow and even a little bit confusing. Although, I'm glad I finished the game now and not in the early 2000s. Having to wait all this time for number 3 must have been quite the average experience. Talking about number 3, if you have been living under a rock and are not aware, was made possible by a Kickstarter campaign and funding by Sony in 2015. Yu Suzuki was unimpressed with Sega keeping it in development hell for so long, so licensed the rights to his own game studio, YSNet. It has been delayed unfortunately, but as of the making of this video, should be seeing a release on the 27th of August next year. As a bonus, if you haven't played either this or the original Shenmue, remasters were released this year for the Xbox One and PS4. As well as having high definition graphics, they also include improved menus and controls, keeping it in line with the modern generation. They also offer a Japanese voice track, which is something that the Dreamcast original Shenmue 2 has that this Xbox port does not. I didn't really touch on it in the review, but the English voice acting in this game is absolutely shocking. Subs before dubs.